Hey girl. Bless her little heart, she had no idea I was here. She's just now seeing me. I'll see you in October. Bring your big daddy around, okay? Anyway, hello everyone. Thanks for coming outside with me today. Hopefully the camera autofocus isn't complete trash today. I'm really struggling to get focus with new lenses and stuff. But we're gonna see if today can work. So today we're out here for kind of the third part, if you will, of this mini series I'm doing. I did the first one kind of on the river access. Nate Fry and I from the Budget Sportsman, we were looking down at some river islands and talking about looking at aerial imagery and looking at a little bit of topography. And then last week I looked at food sources. Specifically oak flats and greenery. I'm not a big ag hunter. I hunt public land here in the mountainous areas of Pennsylvania, and so ag sources and that sort of stuff are not for me. We'll get some hay fields every now and then that butt up to public, but predominantly it's like this, these huge long acorn flats, white oaks and red oaks. And then today I want to talk about access, because access is super critical, and it's just so happens that doe had no idea it was here. Actually, she's still hanging out. Down over there. It's actually a doe fawn. Mama has already skirted off. She's not happy with me being here. But I'm going to pan the camera around here. This access that I had to take, you can see all of this. Look how thick this is. Look at what I'm standing on. They have gone and they have logged, and actually you can see all the treetops laying down on through here. They have gone and cleared out, and if we actually look up at the canopy, we can see now how much sunlight is coming through and hitting the forest floor. This is what I was talking about with those shadows. This used to be all closed canopy, but look at particularly this guy right here. Look at how the canopy of him is straight up. There are no branches until you get at least, I want to say 35, if not 40 feet in the air. That's because it was all closed canopy and there was no reason to have branches down this low because they weren't collecting sunlight. And if you look at all the trees here, unless you see a sapling sprinkled through, their branches are at least 25 feet, if not higher in the air. And that is due to there not being sunlight. Now they've opened it up, and I'm kind of worried, oh, there's a big rock here. I'm kind of worried that we're gonna end up in the same situation over here. This is great bedding cover here. And the deer really like this one because of the access. I'll get to it, trust me. Because of the access, they really like this bedding area over here. And I'm worried, even though this is traditionally, you can see all the ferns and stuff behind me, I'm worried that this will end up looking like that. And that's great for deer and for bedding cover, but that ruins arguably the best hunting spot on this piece of public land here. So I want to talk about access, because the access of this particular piece of public land has changed drastically in just the past year. I'm going to turn the camera around here so we're not so blown out. So the public land access here has changed drastically. So this area behind me is all mountain laurel and privet and some kind of bush honeysuckle type idea. Some beech, really low hanging, autumn olive, lots of that sort of stuff. Great bedding and browse for the deer. It's really thick, very dark and shaded in there. It stays nice and cool. And even though this is a south-facing slope, because the understory canopy is so dense, there's no sunlight hitting the actual ground. It stays very wet and cool. The deer love to bed in there. And this area of this bedding overlooks the only access point to this property. And this is what I want to get at today. When you're hunting public land in particular, even if you're hunting private land, understanding the hunter density and how much access that there is to that piece of property is huge. Here, this piece that I'm standing on is not too big. It's only a couple hundred acres, maybe 500-600 acres. But there's only one access road into this property, and there's only one parking lot, only one public parking lot to this property. There's some private that surrounds it, and you can probably hear the very large interstate that's actually behind me. We're less than probably 150 to 200 yards from the interstate. It's one of those big cutoff sheer drop-offs there. So you can only get so far back here. This is a huge boundary to access. You can exit that way. To our west here is a lot of private land, also contiguous hardwoods. And to our east, there is some ag, but it is at least a half mile away from where I'm standing right now. This is inarguably the best food source on this property in terms of the acorns. It's all white oaks. They've now recently, like I said, gone and logged out all of the understory. So now these trees are definitely not competing for nutrients. They're very far apart from each other, and they're gonna get a lot of good nutrients into these white oak acorns. I wish there were more reds. There's a few scattered. Here's one about 15 yards away. There's more over there about 30 yards away here, and there's a couple more down here, because it's good to have that alternating food source of red and white acorns. You don't really know what's going to be in season. Depends on the weather from years past, actually. Red oaks and white oaks both go on a year-by-year cycle. It's a cyclical basis. But anyway, let's get back to the access. The whole point is this is inarguably the best food source. That means people have to access this food source if they want the best amount of hunting on a food source, if they don't want to hunt travel routes and that sort of stuff. And so that means there's only one way to get here, and that is up that access road. And now this, like I said, this is on a south-facing slope here. This bedding area, even though they can't see it because it's so thick, they can scent check. We get a lot of south-southwest winds year-round here in Pennsylvania. And so they can scent check any hunter that's coming up that road, and they can bolt out of here and go either way down this oak ridge, and you'll never even know they were here because they actually winded you even before you got up onto this topographic line. We're actually pretty high up above the access road where it actually comes into this bedding area. So you have this one access point, you have the best food source. So how on God's green earth did I get past those deer that were in this southern area in this bedding source? I had to bushwhack my own trail. Instead of going straight up, following that access road, coming all the way up from the parking lot, which is, we're a solid mile in right now from the parking lot. It's not a short walk by any means, and the route that I go in order to avoid it is even better in terms of length. But when it comes to accessing this, it's a long walk, which people don't want to do, but this is the best food source. And if anybody knows about it, loose lips sink ships. Never can say that right. Loose lips sink ships. And so as soon as someone says, yeah, that oak flat over there at this particular public piece of property, there's gonna be a lot of people here. So every time they walk up that access road, though, they're getting scent checked by this entire bedding area. Does, bucks, fawns, everything. It's huge. This is at least a 6, if not 7, 8 acre bedding area, which is a lot for just right in the middle of a piece of contiguous block of timber. It's got a nice topographic line, and they're getting scent checked every single time they come in here. So instead of me following that entire trail, I get about halfway till I cross the creek, and then I deliberately go due east and go through the woods and then pop out way down there in the woods on this topographic line. It's a very, very good chance that with a normal wind, 5-10 miles an hour, my scent is never going to leave the creek bottom. It's just going to stay down there and swirl, and I will be able to just go the entire length of the creek bottom, jump up through the woods onto this topo line, and then access this point. That's what I did today, and I got within 40 yards of the mama and her fawn. Now it is summer, they're not on high alert, they're just out here browsing, but I was able to get up here, never had to disperse my scent through that bedding area. Huge, huge access problem for people. And I was able to get right up within these deer, and they had no idea because the wind is a southwest wind today. So I came up behind them. I'm on the northeast corner of this oak flat. They're in the southwest center. They had no idea I was here. I think she's still down there. Yep, she's still down there feeding. Now she's moved off about 100 yards away through the timber, but that fawn has no care in the world that I'm here. She can't smell me, so the wind is just coming directly from her to me. And if she can't hear me right now, I must not be freaking her out. But anyway, let's continue to talk about access, because now the access that they've logged this area has drastically changed this as well. This used to be pretty thick understory. You can see all the saplings that laid around the top here. But now, if I pan the camera around this way, they have accessed this via this half-track road. You can see the giant ruts in here. So they brought in the half-track and the logging, probably took out the high-grade stuff that they wanted to take out of here, the walnut, the beech, the hickory, that sort of stuff, and left the white oaks. Because it's public land, they need the food source. They're not interested in the money of the trees just sitting here. So they've come through and high-graded, left the tops that were not necessary. And again, they could take, beautiful oak trees in here, straight as an arrow. They make some great lumber, great sales, but our Game Commission, in my opinion, does a really good job of maintaining good food here on properties for people to hunt, as well as for the wildlife to survive and thrive. But now they've added this half-track road, and it circles all the way down and around, and it goes right into that access road. It's now a super easy walk to get up in here. You used to have to bushwalk. You can see some of these boulders here. They're quite sizable. And all of these rocks and boulders are just littered out throughout this entire oak ridge. You can see the size of these things. Some of them got overturned with some of the backhoe and stuff they brought in here. And so now this whole half-track road just winds its way clear down through this entirety of this oak ridge, which is, I want to say, probably a little less than half a mile long. It might be, you know, like 3/8 of a mile long. It's at least over a quarter. And so they've probably driven out the whole way. I'm just started here. I'm only a few hundred yards in. But now this drastically changes the access because now somebody can just walk right through here. And also change the access because now deer can just walk right down through here. They don't have to pick their way around all the ferns and the boulders. So this is a key port. Not only do we have the easy of access, people can ride bikes now that we've opened up motorbikes here in PA. Can't do a four-wheeler or something like that, but they can walk and maybe they get scent checked down through here. Who knows if the deer are bedded. Now they can get up on this topo line. They can walk out through here. Heck, they could really, if they wanted to rough ride their e-bike out through here. This used to be easy to get away from people. Once you get up on this topo line and you got about a quarter mile, at least, like I said, down through here, no one was out here screwing around. It was basically just you. It's a long hike to get back up through there. You can't access it from the west side because that piece kind of bends around and butts up against private and you'd be trespassing. So this is the only way to make this big, almost like a number 7, right? Comes up at an angle, then cuts straight across. It's the only way to access it up here. And so that's why I liked it only having one parking lot and one main access road. Because if you have a whole bunch of different parking lots, you have a whole bunch of different access roads, you got foot trails all through the thing, you'll never know where the pressure has been. It's really easy for me to know where the pressure has been because it's easy to follow people's footsteps when there's only one trail, there's only one access point, and it's easy to see in ferns and stuff like this where people have stepped and bruised the foliage. Deer don't do that, even bears don't do that, but people, we bruise over foliage real easy. We'll put flagging tape through all the stuff, marking right to our stands. So I'm going to keep walking down this flat here. We're going to talk a little bit more about access and as it relates in particular to this giant roadway that you probably hear screaming behind me. So let's keep walking through and see what we got. All right, here's another part of access. Obviously, I like having as few access points as possible. It means people have to get boots on the ground. They have to get back in here. I really like that piece for that. And last year, Nate and I came in and hunted across the way on a red oak flat because red oaks were huge last year. Very inaccessible. It was well over a mile, almost a mile and a half to get in there one way, all uphill, you know the old phrase. But the thing was that there was no way you could hunt it in gun season. It was just a bow hunting spot. The windows were so tight, particularly in the early season when the acorns were actually falling and it was still green. We had a lot of evergreens in that area too. The accessibility for a gun hunter, a muzzleloader hunter, or a shotgun or centerfire hunter was just, it was pointless for them to sit there. If you're gonna hunt with a gun, you might as well be able to see a little bit so you can shoot a little bit. And that's what we've now encountered here. This access or accessibility here on this point of this oak ridge that, like I said, it stands for, quarter, maybe 3/8 of a mile at least, has now drastically gotten way, way, way more in favor of a gun hunter than a bow hunter. So let's take a look at this here. Right here off to my left is the point, you can see with this evergreen tree here, is the point of this bedding. So here's this evergreen and this bedding comes up and around, and right where I'm standing used to be the best pinch in terms of hunting on the north side of this. South-southwest wind, bucks would cruise between here and the bedding. They would come over here, they would cruise between here and the bedding, they'd pop right on the other side of this evergreen tree, and you would sit right behind in these white oaks somewhere, predominantly these two. This guy right here, he was a little skinny, but you get the idea. And you could sit right there and have a chip shot at a buck that's cruising, scent checking this southern facing slope bedding area, which is really nice in the cold months. When some of the foliage starts to die off and the sun can get through, they get a wind shear, stay warm. Now, as you can see behind me, look how open this is. You can see all the treetops here that have been left. They've cut all this stuff out behind you here. They've cut all of this stuff out here. All of it, and it is now wide open, way down through there. You can see that we are almost at the end of where they're cutting. You can see where the green line here stops, and we actually are now done with it. But we have now walked through at least a quarter of a mile of logged area, and most of it is all the same height with the exception of this little knob behind me here. This knob is like the highest point here. I'm kind of on the middle of the two topo lines here. It's a very flat little bench. It's about 40 yards wide. If you get up here behind me, up into these oaks, up towards these evergreens here, you can see almost the entirety of that oak flat. Here in Pennsylvania, the accessibility for hunters with a firearm is a problem that we as archers have to deal with. In the early season of archery here in Pennsylvania, the second or third week, they have a week-long muzzleloader doe season. Right smack in the middle of archery, right when the acorns are falling, drives me nuts. It's statewide, antlerless only, but everybody comes out here with an inline or a flintlock and they just start blasting away at does. And if you can get on an oak flat like this, and we all know inline muzzleloaders today can easily shoot 150, if not 200 yards. And if they can get up here with a ladder stand or a hang on, they get a nice bipod or a rest, or even sit on the ground because it's pretty flat, this whole oak flat is shot. Once there starts getting pressure on it, then in the latter half of that week, there's actually a 3-day firearms, they can use centerfire firearms for youth. That's up to 16 years old. So you get a 15-year-old kid out here with a 243 and he can cover this whole flat, right? So not only is it the access of how they get up in here, but it's the accessibility of how easily it can be hunted with other weapons. Now, I know that kind of pre-firearm season here in PA is a little bit unique. It's not something you see across the country, but it's definitely something we have here in PA. It's recent, and we've really had to start to adjust our archery hunting tactics. This flat now that I know how long it's now been logged, after that first week of archery, I'm not touching this thing. It's just gonna get blasted away. I've looked up with the binos, there's a few white oaks that have got some good crops. All these trees are roughly the same age. There's nothing that's really a granddaddy. I know there's some big white oaks out this point, past this access of logged area, and that's where I'm headed to right now. I want to see if they're still there. I want to make sure they didn't high grade those out. I'm talking, you know, maybe 3 feet in diameter. Huge white oaks out there. I shot a buck out of one 2 years ago in 2018. So that's where I'm headed to now, because if I have to push all past this accessible area, even do my big loop, and I got to walk 2 miles and change to get all the way out to the end of this point, to get away from people and to get that least hospitable, least accessible area, I'm going to do it. So let's put the camera away. Let's hike out here. Keep in mind, you got to watch for this stuff. You licking your chops in the summertime as a bow hunter, you can actually see. We all used to the early season where you're like, look away and you look back and you look away again. And right here is a deer at 20 yards. You have no idea how I got there in 10 seconds. We've all been there, and this looks great. You can see deer for a long way. I can see that mama and fawn. But here in PA, that second or third week archery season, there's going to be dudes up here in orange, and the accessibility is going to ruin the access for this spot. So I'm going to stop flapping my gums. Let's head down the ridge here and see if those big white oaks are there and how accessible they still are. All right, so here we are. The reason why access to a piece of public and accessibility in terms of what kind of weapon you're hunting with are so stinking important. We have moved, and I'll pan the camera around here. We're gonna be doing a lot of panning here, so bear with me. Clean back through here by about another 200 yards is where we were last standing, there in the middle and kind of that little plateau area. You now can see how thick it is in here. It's incredibly thick in here. The visibility, even from a tree stand, is only about maybe 65, 75 yards at the most. That's just visibility, not actual feasible shooting lanes. Where we are here is, I think, inarguably the best bow hunting spot on this property. This is where I shot my buck in 2018, and I shot it out of this white oak tree right here, okay? Behind this white oak right over here, that guy, that big base there, that is a massive, massive red oak. He's probably about 3 foot, 2.5 to 3 foot in diameter. I have a giant white oak here, at least a solid 18 to 24 inches in diameter. I have another one right here. I have another one about 30 yards away. I have 2 right here, and I have another big red oak about 50 yards away through the timber there. I'm surrounded by incredibly good food sources. This red oak here has actually still held acorns. There's actually scratching all through here, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not. I'll try to zoom in on it where the camera's actually at. You can see right here, look at all that overturned leaf duff, and actually goes all the way up to the base of that red oak right there. So not only are these areas hard to access for hunters. They're just hard, good food sources in general that are accessible to the deer. And this is why this is important, okay? I'm 1.7 miles to the parking lot according to OnX, making that big 7 going up and then cutting across westerly. 1.7 miles from the parking lot, and I haven't even hung my tree stand yet. I have multiple huge trees. You'll see all the saplings, right? They're all very small. This was clearly high graded or logged probably 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And all of these trees were the root ball saplings that sprung up as a result. And they're all pretty much maples, some beech, some walnuts, nothing really useful. But I don't know if the Game Commission did it or what, but they left these humongous red and white oaks. Wonderful, wonderful spot. This comes off here topographically about 60 yards away. It starts to dip down into a creek bottom. So you have a western slope, which is great for the early season because it gets shaded the most. You have a western slope. It's real thick over there. It's real nasty. It's thick in here the whole place over. Lots of great bedding cover, lots of great green browse, but then when they get up onto this topo line, if they come out of the creek bottom here, over here, you might be able to see through the trees a lot more of that sunlight. This is a secondary bedding area here, just like the first one we saw where that doe and that doe fawn were at. This is a secondary one a couple hundred yards down this ridge, also south-facing slope, also facing towards the creek bottom. They can come out of that bedding area, come out of the creek bottom here. They can come out of this trench of the creek bottom on the western side, come up and stage in here. It can be 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6, 7 o'clock, doesn't matter. They got plenty of shade. It's nice and cool in the understory. They have acorns when they're falling from these massive trees. I mean, like I said, we probably have about half a dozen of them. Most of them are white oaks, but there's 2 big red oaks. They can stage in here. They can browse on the green underneath here. And actually, I'm looking around, there's actually a lot of browse on some of the foliage down here. You'll notice the number of ferns in here. Here, ferns over here, but then we have all of this browse right here. This isn't ferns, whereas on the backside in that other oak flat, it was all ferns. No native understory browse, no browse in general, native or non-native. So here we have just the epitome of a staging area. It's hard to access for humans. The accessibility for gun hunters to hunt back in here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. For the deer to get in here, super simple. They're super secure. They can scent check. If they got a south wind, they can scent check, again, that road, that whole south bedding area while they're in the bedding area. Come up here and stage, wait for the cover of darkness, and then head out into that huge oak flat where all those red and white oaks are at. There were no acorns out there. No leftover. Here, this red oak here, because this is a staging area, not a main food source, is not a huge draw for the deer. There's only one tree here, and they can't actually eat all of the acorns. So this area is a huge staging area. Deer come up here, they can mill around, they can browse, they can eat the acorns, and they're just waiting for darkness to go out into that huge wide open oak flat where they're very easily seen in broad daylight, just like I saw that mother and the doe fawn. And they can go out there, browse, and eat the acorns all night, right back into bed under the cover of darkness. You'd never know they were here. So that's why I focus on access so much, because this is a hard to get to area, but it's a hard to get to area that makes sense. Just going in deep doesn't do you any good if there's no reason for the deer to access this area either. They have huge red and white oaks in here, not many. They're all clustered here within a 60-yard radius of where I'm standing. So you're definitely guaranteed to get in here on a good food time and a good food time sit. Now the problem is here, you can't just go in deep and sit anywhere and see deer. They're still deer. They're still a prey species. I still would only come in here when the wind's right. So if I get that good south, maybe if I push it, I could deal with a westerly wind that pushes into that oak flat. If I come up high enough and access high enough and sit in a tree back behind the camera a little bit more and just hope that they continue to come out a little bit closer. Because again, you're limited to about 20, 25, maybe 30 if you push it yard shot through here. This tree right here where I shot my buck out 2 years ago, he was standing at 15 yards right here by this white oak. Now, he wasn't in search of food, he was in search of a doe in heat during the rut, but the same rule applies. He had to come up on the south side, or excuse me, on the westerly to the north side of this bedding area to scent check it, and he ended up coming out here. We had a kerfuffle going on with another doe being chased by a really small buck, and he wanted to come check it out. He was already coming up through here anyway, and I was able to get the shot at 15 yards. So finding the access that's out of the way, it's difficult, And bow hunters probably are going to only be the ones that are going to want to hunt it, in particular if you have a mixed season of firearms right in the middle of your archery season. Super important to find spots like this. I cannot iterate it and reiterate it enough. It is so important to find inaccessible in terms of the firearms or the bows that are being used, as well as getting away from the parking lot and having fewer parking lots that surround a public piece. If there was a public parking lot just over here that came through this private land, this spot would be pointless. It'd be absolutely pointless. I'm probably about 200 yards from the property line. And like I said, it's a big, deep, steep creek bottom, so there's no real private push coming this way either to get onto this piece. So if there was a parking lot over here, this spot would be pointless. It would be absolutely useless. If you could access it from the interstate over here, which I'm about 250, 300 yards from, it'd almost be pointless. But there's only one parking lot. It's almost 2 miles in terms of getting here in a smart way. I could bushwhack from the parking lot up through the creek bottom, come right up through here, and I blow every deer out, but it'd only take me about 2/3 of a mile to get up here, but I blow every deer out that's back in here. So access, access, access. It's so important. All right, well, I'm sorry for continuing to ramble, but if you have any questions about why I'm looking at access points like this and what else I do with aerial scouting to find these pieces of public or private with fewer and fewer amount of access points, follow links in the description below. Hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, send me an email. Of course, you can always leave a comment here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful, sunshiny, green creation, and we'll get to see you next time.